Okay, we are in part 2 of our series called Visionary Love, and what we talked about last week, we talked about marriage, and contrary to popular opinion, like the key to being married, the key to a lasting, loving relationship isn't finding the right person, but it's being the right person. If you focus as a spouse on getting your needs met, and if I'm getting my needs met versus trying to meet the needs of others, it's not going to go well. Because if you're focused on your own needs and the other person's focused on their own needs, nobody gets their needs met, and so that causes a problem. Not only that, we talked about how that is the complete opposite of the mind of Christ. And single people, if you buy into this myth that if I just find the right person and then we'll live happily ever after, just like the Disney movies say that they spend an hour and a half against all odds, and the whole thing is about them finding each other, and once they find each other, that's it. It's over. They don't tell the rest of the story, and they can't, because if they did, it would take a really long time. There'd be lots of conflict, and it's not, the key isn't you finding the right person, but it's about you becoming the right person. And as you seek to become the right person, your chances of actually finding someone who's also trying to be the right person, go up by a factor of 10. So that's good as well. And today we're going to have the sex talk. We are going to have the sex talk that your parents did not give you. We're going to have the sex talk that culture doesn't give you either, even though it's been around a long time. And I think it's something that we all intuitively know, but we just kind of avoid it. It's knowledge about how you're hardwired, and if you go against this, if you don't understand how you're hardwired, it will cause extreme pain and damage. And if you live according to this, it will cause extreme joy. All in favor of extreme joy? Okay, we'll continue. So, but people don't, we know this truth, but we don't really live according to it all, and it seems obvious, but we miss it all the time. In fact, those in the Corinthian church missed it all the time. I don't know if you noticed this as the scripture was being read, but it said 3 times, "Do you not know? Do you not know? Do you not know this?" I mean, certainly you know this. And here's what it is that I think is obvious, even though that we don't live as though it's true, is that sex is not physical. It's not just physical, I should say. That this is such an obvious truth that many people don't live as though that is true, and that is sex. It's just not physical. In our culture, it's treated as something that is merely physical. In other words, if no one gets hurt, if it's consensual, if there's no disease, if there's no unwanted pregnancy, then it's good. And what's the problem? Because it's physical. It's like ping pong. It's like touch football. More like tackle football. More like tackle football and seeing how long you can stay down on the ground. It's just a physical thing. And there's nothing more to it. Once you have sex and then you move on, and what's the problem? It's just a physical thing. And this is how some people in the Corinthian church were viewing sex, and so that's why in verse 13, Paul repeats something that was a very popular saying in culture, which I think sounds like what you might hear today. It says, food is meant for the stomach, and stomach for the food. In other words, sex is just an appetite that needs to be fed. If you're hungry, eat. If you're feeling sexy, sex. It's just an appetite. And just like with food, if there's, it's great to have choice and options and lots of cuisines, and the same thing with sex. It's just an appetite. It's a desire like anything else. And then there was another view on the complete other side of the spectrum that to contrast with this, which we didn't read, because I didn't want you just to walk up and leave. It says, but it wasn't actually Paul saying this. He was just repeating back what many people were saying in the church. It says, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. It's like, who let that guy in the church? But these were like the two views that were there. You had people who were saying hey, it's just an appetite. It's just physical. It's nothing more than just physical. And then you had other people who were saying on the complete opposite. No, it's better not even to have it. It's just for procreation. It's on those two opposite extremes. And these are I think it's proof to the fact that there's nothing really new under the sun. Because back then and all throughout history and even now, there's these two basic views of sex. One that says it's just physical and the other one that just says that it should be limited and it's gross and it shouldn't happen and we need to kind of get over our desires. And so when you look throughout history in the 2nd century, guys like church fathers like Ambrose and Tertullian said that they preferred the extinction of the human race over continued sexual intercourse. Another church father in the 3rd century, Origen, wanted to so distance himself from sex that he castrated himself and went around saying, sex is really bad. And the Bible says if something caused you to sin, cut it off, and he did. And, we at Jubilee Church, we have other alternatives, but, hey, that's what he wanted to do. And then St. Jerome, in the 5th century, he would throw himself into thorn bushes when he was overcome by sexual desire. It's like, Jerome, take a cold shower, man. Don't. And it wasn't just in the church, lest you think it's a church thing. This is what Plato said as well. Platonism, Greek philosophy, wanted to abstain from sex. It's where you get the phrase platonic relationship. It comes from Platonism. Platonic relationship, a relationship that has no chance of sex. It's, the friend zone. It's just like when they don't like you in that way, it's a platonic relationship. No romance involved. It comes from Plato. It comes from Platonism. It comes from Greek philosophy. Platonism says we don't need sex. It's this perspective that it's animalism and we need to rise above this and we just need to bring our desires under control. And this is what every worldview does, by the way. Every worldview vilifies something. And in Platonism, it vilified the body. In the gospel, it's sin. And so in Platonism, said we need to rise above the desires of our body. And then that kind of had its day. And then Romanticism and modernism brought to the table another view of sex that said that the villain isn't our body. The villain really is society. That society tries to put all this pressure on you and all these controls on you and all these rules on you. And really there's this creativity and goodness brewing in every individual. And what we need to do is just allow the individual to express himself any way that he can. And any attempt for society to kind of put a lid on that is wrong. And that's the real villain. The real villain is society trying to sort that out. And so self-expression is premium. People are good at the core, and you shouldn't put any restrictions on that at all. And those are basically the two basic views of sexuality today and sex. It just depends whether you live in a blue state or a red state. If you live in the blue part of town or the red part of town. And the red part of town is, sex should be avoided for just procreation. And the blue part of town, sex is physical and no harm, no foul. But both of these views fall way, way short of the biblical view of sex and where Paul goes today. So Corinthians, they fell way short as well. So Paul, who was neither Republican or Democrat, took some time to speak into this issue, and he's not some narrow-minded religious guy, trying to raid on their parade, but he's this loving pastor trying to bring healing where there's brokenness, trying to bring freedom where there's bondage, trying to bring hope where there's disappointment and regret, and that's my goal as well today. And his major point over these verses is that sex is just not physical. And I believe that you believe that deep down in your heart, this is true. Even though we don't always act this way, I believe that every human being knows that sex is more than just physical, even though we treat it that way. And I just want to present to you a couple questions that I thought about, and I try to talk myself out of not asking. Because it could surface some issues that you may not want to think about, but I think it's helpful. It's really, really important that you see that sex is more than just physical. Because if sex was just a physical act, why is it when someone is sexually abused, that when they grow older and they realize what happened to them, it's not something they can easily shake? If it's just, it's just a physical thing, then why does that stick with people? Why is it when a woman is raped? Why is it long after the physical wounds heal, the emotional wounds are deep? Why is it that, a woman has no problem reporting being mugged or being beaten up, but she feels as though she has to carry the rape and she can't let anyone know. I was watching Dateline last week, a week ago maybe, and there was this woman, this reporter from Somalia, who was captured. And for about 15 months, she was brutally, physically and mentally and emotionally tortured. She was made to just stay on a little bitty mat. She was lifted up by her arms and her legs for days, just extreme, being kicked and punched, had her teeth knocked out, just extreme stuff. And that physical beating and pain and torture was the only thing that she could talk about for a couple of years. And what she hid is she hid the rape. Even though that the physical, the beatings were much more severe physically than the rape. Why is it that her darkest horror was the rape and not the beating? Not having her life at the very end. It's because something that we all know that's true. That sex goes well beyond the physical. There's something deeper that's going on there. And if you don't understand this, if you don't treat it this way, you'll miss out on the joy of it, and you'll also take on the extreme pain that can come when you treat it as something that's just physical. Why is it that men with the deepest sexual issues, in most cases, and I would say in my experience 100% of the time, men with the deepest sexual issues, addictions, whatever you want to call it, why is it that it's always linked to a missing or an uninvolved father? 100% of the time in my experience. Why is that? Because it's not just physical. Why is it when someone tells you their deepest, darkest secret, it's not like, hey, I bumped into someone at the mall and I didn't leave a note. I dented their car and I didn't leave a note. It's not. It's usually like, I was on spring break and I thought he was the one and I didn't think it would come to this. It always, their deepest, darkest secrets are always sexual. Why is that? Because it's something that we know is true, and that is sex. It goes well beyond the physical. And that's exactly what Paul told the Corinthians 2,000 years ago. The same thing that we all know that's true in our heart. Paul writes this down and wants us to know that it's not just... So he says this. He says, do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one with her? Now, don't read too much into that word prostitute, because back then everybody was married. The only people who weren't married were prostitutes. And so don't just think he's talking about finding a prostitute. He's just talking about sexual immorality in general. He says, do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one with her? Now, let me tell you how the Corinthians would have taken this verse. They would have taken it just like you and I would, because this word here, joined, really means clings to or unites to. And so when they would have heard him say, why are you clinging to? Why are you uniting? Why are you becoming so cling to this prostitute? He's like, hey, no one's clinging to anything. No one's joining anything. It's just sex. It's just a physical act. He's like, do you not know? And this is why he says this. Do you not know that when someone unites with a prostitute, they become one with them? It's like, no, we're just having, Paul, you're using this word that means bonding. You're using this word that means clinging together, permanent, intertwined, like scrambled eggs. Can't tell the difference between one or the other. You're using this word that is relating to saying, like, hey, when we have sex, that we become like, we are two, now we become one, and now we can't be separated. That's the kind of language you're using, that when you have sex with someone, you become inseparable. Paul, we're just having sex. He's like, I know. Do you not know that when this happens, you become one with him? There's something deeper. He's not just saying this like, hey, look, there's a bigger judgment for sexual sin. God really hates this sin more than he's not saying that at all. He's saying it, look, do you not know that this is a deep, deep thing? And you're going to bring pain in your life that's deeper than you've ever experienced if you don't understand. Because he says, for as it is written, two will become one. Two will become one. A one that can't be and should not be unone. sex is as connected to your soul as anything imaginable. In fact, that word, the Hebrew word dod, which means the word for sex means the mingling of souls. It means that it's not just a physical act, because it's meant to, God, the way he designed you and wired you is that when you come together physically in sex, that your souls come together and mingle as well. And it's a deep, deep emotional thing. It is a deep, deep spiritual thing. And herein lies the mystery of why this is so important. Why this is so important, why the boundaries of marriage are so important. It's not to stifle sexual enjoyment, but it's to increase it and to keep it from damaging you at the deepest level. The Bible is pro-sex. The Bible is for sexual creativity. The Bible is for sexual freedom. If I had the time, I could take you to places. We could spend more than one sermon going to places that if I was to preach from this, you would blush. And you would not want to look me in the eye. You wouldn't want to look anyone else in the eye. The Bible is full of just think about how the Bible begins. In Genesis 2, the very beginning, you have a naked man singing ravenous love songs over a naked woman. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, in the presence of God. The Bible starts with a naked man serenading a naked woman in the presence of God. And that's just the beginning. That's how this thing starts. And then if you read like Proverbs 5, it says that a husband should be intoxicated by the love of his wife always. Should be ravished by her breast. That's what it says. I mean, how do you get around that? People are always saying, hey, are you one of those fundamental churches that takes the Bible literally? I'm like, well, sometimes there's an advantage for taking the Bible literally. And it just... I haven't even mentioned the Song of Solomon yet, which 13-year-old boys, Hebrew boys, were not allowed to even read this book until they were 13 because of the highly suggestive. The Bible is pro-sex. It does not minimize it to procreation. That you'd be intoxicated with the love of your wife always. Not just 5, 6, or 7, or 8 times, during your marriage or whatever it is. Always. It's for it. It's a gift from God. He designed it. He created it to be enjoyed. He just puts one restriction on it. He puts one restriction on it, and that one boundary, and that is sex is to only happen in the context of a covenantal relationship called marriage. And now to really understand why this is important, I think you need to understand what a covenant relationship is. A covenant relationship is an agreement between two people who love each other regardless of circumstance and regardless of how the other person treats them. That's what a covenant relationship is. A covenant relationship is you act independently of any outside circumstance or even how the other person treats you. That's not how most romantic relationships are today. Most romantic relationships today are not covenant relationships, they're consumer relationships. In a consumer relationship, in the traditional use of the word, you relate to a vendor. And you have a relationship with that vendor as long as they give a quality product at a good price. And there's no question that you have a relationship, but you're always looking for an upgrade. Like, we have a relationship. I do business with you, but if someone else comes along and gives me a better offer, or it's a better quality or a cheaper price, well, then we don't have a relationship anymore. That's what a consumer relationship is. So what you say to a vendor is, you need to keep adjusting to me. You need to keep adjusting to my needs. You need to continue to because if you don't meet my needs, then I'm out of here. And my needs are more important. We have a relationship. There's no doubt about it. But my needs are what's most important here in a consumer relationship. A covenant relationship is exactly the opposite. In a consumer relationship, you adjust to me. In a covenant relationship, I adjust to you. Whether you're sick, whether you're poor, whether you're in a wheelchair, whether you can hold a job down or not, whether you gain a bunch of weight, I adjust to you. You don't adjust to me. Consumer relationship, you adjust to me. Covenant relationship, I adjust to you. In a consumer relationship, my needs are more important in the relationship. In a covenant relationship, the relationship is more important than my needs. And it's in this covenant relationship, and only in this covenant relationship, that our heart finally gets what it wants. It finally gets that zone of safety that we need. In a consumer relationship, you're always marketing. You're always trying to sell yourself. You're always got to perform. You always got to meet the needs of the other person, or they're out. There's this pressure. There's not this zone of safety. In a covenant relationship, you can finally be yourself. A consumer relationship is fueled by the performance, regardless of the promise. In a covenant relationship, it's fueled by a promise, regardless of the performance. It's a zone of safety. What does this have to do with sex? Everything. Everything. Because sex is a covenantal good, not a consumer good. It's a covenantal good, not a consumer good. Sex is like a sacrament. It is an external symbol of an invisible reality. Two people joining as one. What makes you married is you have a vow. You make a vow, you make a promise, and then the exchanging of the rings is a one-time symbol that you are in this relationship. And sex is an ongoing renewing of that covenant. It's a covenant renewal ceremony. You're saying we were two and now we become one, and every time we have sex, I'm just renewing that vow. Same way, if you think about our relationship with Jesus, there's a lot of parallels here. That when you come into a relationship with Jesus, you make a vow. He first makes a vow to you, of course, but you make a vow to him. It's faith that unites you. Baptism, just like the ring in a wedding, is a one-time symbol that you're with them, that you have this covenant. You're with Jesus now. We saw that today. Communion is an ongoing renewal of that relationship. Just like with marriage. And in fact, actually, the reason why marriage relationships, I think, tend to fail, and I think the reason why a lot of times in your relationship with Jesus, because we forget what makes this relationship work. So Jesus says, I want you to do communion very often to remind you why this relationship is possible. It's about my blood. It's about my body broken for you. So we have this renewal ceremony that you're saying, this is my confession. My confession is I was a sinner, and Jesus, you paid the price for my sin. And sex is the same way. You're saying, I'm renewing this vow. The reason why marriage relationships don't work is because two don't actually become one. Two stay two. And what sex is a powerful reminder that two people are becoming one. And he made it enjoyable to encourage us to do it often. In fact, later in chapter 7, 1 Corinthians 7, Paul says that you should not abstain from sex except to pray. So if you weren't at the prayer meeting on Friday night, we know what you're doing, all right? So those of us, everybody else came to prayer, but hey. But that's, and it's not against it, it's for it, but it's saying there is a deep, deep, deep meaning to this. It's about two people coming together as one, mingling together, uniting as one flesh. And sex is a reminder of that vow. It's a covenant renewal ceremony. It's a powerful deepening experience that goes well beyond the physical. So when you use sex inside of a marriage, it becomes a vehicle for engaging the whole purpose and the act of self-donation to the other. And when in marriage I make myself physically naked and vulnerable, it's a sign that I'm doing this with my entire life. With my whole life, I am making myself naked and vulnerable for my wife. That's what it's saying, and that's because that's what it's meant to be. It's a sign of what I've done with my whole life. That's why sex outside of marriage isn't just like morally wrong, but it lacks integrity. It's hypocritical. It's because you're asking someone to do with their sexuality what they're not going to do with their whole life. It's physical disclosure, but it's not whole life disclosure. So it's not actually, it lacks integrity. It's hypocritical. When you have sex inside of marriage, you're renewing that covenant all over again. And you're saying, I'm giving myself to you all over again. I'm making this promise to you all over again. We're coming together as one all over again. And it's incredibly deepening and solidifying and nurturing experience. It's saying that I'm giving you, as a token, my body, what I've done with my whole life. But when you have sex outside of marriage, all you're saying is that I love the feeling that I have when I'm with you, but I really don't love you. That's what you're saying. And it's hypocritical. You're taking and not giving. You're using it as a consumer good and not a covenantal good. And we'll get this in a minute, you will damage your soul's ability to connect with someone else. And while this is something the Bible has always said, more and more, you're actually hearing more about this in culture. In fact, I was reading an article in New York Times. It's from April of 2012, called "The Downside of Cohabitation," and it really basically just says what all the statistics have always said, which is cohabitation leads to a breakdown in relationship and not a kind of a better relationship is what it's meant to be. Kind of like, you're kind of trying it out a little bit. And in that article, it just talks about how your chances of a healthy relationship just go way, way down. And one of the reasons this author, Meg Jay, she points out, she says, the standards we have for someone we would cohabitate with are far lower than a spouse. In one of her interviews, she interviewed a bunch of people, she made this statement about her experience. I felt like I was on a multi-year, never-ending audition to be his wife. And of course she does, because cohabitating relationship is a consumer relationship. And the thought in the back of your mind is always, can I do better? And so a cohabitating relationship is kind of a nice way of saying, I'm not sure you're good enough for me. And I'll take from you, but I'm not really ready to give to you. And you're treating it like a consumer good. So what is sex in that kind of relationship? Well, it's marketing. You're marketing yourself. And you are ruining your soul's ability to connect deeper. I mean, because sex is kind of like Velcro. And the way that God made it, he made it like to where when you come together, you stick. And the more that you have sex, the more that you stick. And you're doing sexually what you're saying you're doing with your whole life. But if you're not really committed to that person wholeheartedly, and you come together with someone and then you separate out and you come together and you say, well, what happens to Velcro? Well, it wears off. It doesn't stick anymore. And single people, you may be seeing somebody who's married who's experienced that. And their soul just it's just numb to it, and it doesn't have the same effect. I believe that God can restore that. But God had made sex in this powerful, powerful way to draw people who are normally two to bring one. That's why I laugh when I hear people say things like, they need to, practice makes perfect, and, I need to make sure I know what I'm doing before I get married, and, because some of us had that thought, I don't want to look stupid. When I get married, I want to look stupid. Let me give you some advice from someone who's been married 13 years. Look stupid. In fact, fake it if you have to. Just look really stupid. It's not skill that fuels romance, but it's exclusivity and oneness. It's saying this is, I'm one with you and we're together and there's no one else. And that's what fuels romance, not skill. And here's the thing, you know what? You physically, you won't even need one lesson and you'll figure it out. You don't need a lesson for that. It's not like playing golf or a musical instrument where you need to practice a lot to get good at it. Say, you know what, I'm going to look stupid. I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, do you think that your spouse is going to be like, I am so happy you practiced. Man, you're just so well practiced. This is amazing. It's fueled by, hey, I'm giving you my whole life. I've waited for you and I'm giving you my whole life. It's just amazing, amazing, deepening thing that Paul wants us to know about, and I want you to know about. Therefore, in light of what happens when you have sex, Paul says, flee from sexual immorality. Flee from it. Don't manage it. Don't try to rationalize it. Don't try to think that you're the exclusive. Flee from it. Why? Because, there's a deeper rung of hell for people who have, sexually immoral people. No, because of the damage it will cause. It's meant to be this thing that would bring this deep, deep level of joy and intimacy. But used in the wrong way, it will cause pain at the deepest, deepest level. This is why he says, every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. The reason why sex is treated differently in the Bible is because the level of pain it can cause. It causes deep, deep, deep pain. And the consequences of it you carry for the rest of your life. You carry for the rest of your life. Sometimes people want to boil sexuality down to a preference. So it's kind of like, hey, Brian, this is good for you. I'm glad, I hear what you're saying, but, I've got to, and this is my preference, and this is maybe good for church people, but this is something else. But sexuality is not a preference. Let me explain that. Sexuality is not a preference because it has a predictable outcome. It's not like, if you have a favorite color, favorite music, favorite movie, those are because there's no predictable outcome or consequence to that. If you like this movie, it's like, well, you like it, and that's just it. There's no consequence to that. With sexual behavior, there's a predictable outcome. It's more like nutrition. Yeah, you can choose to eat fatty foods. You can choose to, not exercise and smoke, and that has a predictable outcome. If you choose to eat right, eat vegetables, exercise, all that stuff, that has a predictable outcome. And the reason why is because of design. The way that food was designed, has this predictable outcome. And the same way with sex. Because of design, this has a predictable outcome. The way God designed it. It's not just a preference. He designed it. This isn't something that was invented in some back alley porn shop. This is the creator of the universe gave this to us. He designed it, and all the amazing physiological things that need to happen for sex to happen, he was in on that. He was behind this. And because he said, you know what, I'm going to I've given it to animals so they can reproduce. I'm going to do something different with human beings. I'm going to make this a deep, emotional, and spiritual experience because I want them to come together as one. I want them to be one. And there's a reason why he did that Paul picked up on as well. You might have noticed that he bookended these statements with these statements about how we are one with God, that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. I want to bring them together as one to show them how I come together with them as one. And actually, your understanding of the gospel and understanding of sex are more similar than you might think, because both require a death to independence. See, to come into a relationship with God, that you surrender your life. You let go of everything, and you follow him. You let go of your independence. And you know what? He did the same thing. In that text, it says, you have been bought with a price. What was that price? It was his life. He let go of his independence. And that is how our spirit is joined with him. That is how we become one. And in sex, it's the same way. It's letting go of your independence. It's saying, I am in this with both feet. I am going to let go of my former life, and I am coming together as one with this person. And if you understand sex rightly, you'll see that you must let go of your independence for marriage and sex to work as God has created it. And the same way it is with the gospel, the same way it is with our relationship with Jesus. He's bringing that out. You excel in this. I've created you. I've become one with you. You are temples of the Holy Spirit. God doesn't live in a physical building. He doesn't live in a box. He doesn't live on a mountain. He doesn't live in the sky. He lives in each one of us. He has come to us. He has united with us. He has become one with us. And that happens when we let go of our independence. Same thing with sex and marriage. We let go of our independence. That's how it works. God wants you to know that. God also wants us to know the extreme joy. Sex is really a dim picture of the kind of splendor and joy that we will enjoy with him when we fall into the arms of him on that day. Earlier in 1 Corinthians, Paul writes that no eyes ever seen, no ears ever heard, no minds ever conceived the thing that God has laid up for us. And this coming together that we experience with our spouse. I know it sounds strange if you've never heard it before, but it just kind of sheds light on a dim reality, just how amazing and the oneness and togetherness and the joy and the splendor that we will experience on that day. And with that in mind, you actually don't even, if you believe that, especially those of us who are single, we don't have to idolize sex. We don't have to see that as being the ultimate thing, because it's not. We don't have to overwant it. You know, there's that time when Jesus, he met that woman in John 4, the woman at the well. Says, I've got living water you'll never have to drink again. She's like, I'd love to have that water. And he's like, great, show me your husband. Take me to your husband. She's like, yeah, that's not your husband, is it? And you've had 4 or 5 others. She was like this woman who just idolized sexual activity. It's like being on a raft in the middle of the ocean, dying of thirst. Water all around you, but nothing to drink. And when you give yourself to anything but God, sex included, you're just like that. You're just like, you have water all around you, but nothing to drink. And Jesus comes to you and says, I will give you living water. I just want to end here by saying, make Jesus your ultimate hope. All these things in this life, even sex, even marriage, just point us to how much greater it is to know and be known and to be loved by Jesus, to be one with him. I just want to encourage us to lift up our eyes to that reality. It's available to us all. Why don't you stand? We're going to close. If I can get the band to come up. I just want to invite people, if they don't know Jesus and they want to know